Welcome to Eggs, the podcast, featuring the best and brightest minds in business leadership, entrepreneurship, and technology. Today, we have special guest Cliff Beach. Cliff is a musician, author, and entrepreneur who's been performing live for more than 20 years. He's recently released his book, Side Hustle and Flow, which chronicles his musical journey while balancing a day job. Cliff is passionate about helping people achieve their goals and maintain diversified income streams. On today's episode, Cliff will be sharing his insights on side hustling and why it's the perfect time to become an entrepreneur outside of work, the myth of motivation and how having grit and a compelling why can help you in pursuing your dreams, the benefits of time management and having an action plan with measurable goals, and so much more. Cliff is a winner of the John Lennon Songwriting Contest and has been nominated for several LA Music Awards, and we're excited to have him on the show. Please join us in welcoming Cliff Beach. Hey, Cliff, how are you, man?
Oh, great to be here. Excited about all these little eggs we're going to be dropping today.
Love it. Well, thank you so much for doing the show, man. We really appreciate you taking the time out of your day.
Yeah. So you're calling in for... Oh, go ahead. Sorry, I cut you off there. I was going to get into it.
No, go ahead, Mike. Get into it.
I was just going to say, you're calling in from LA. You're a musician. Can you tell us what kind of musician you are? A little bit about your music career.
I'm a good musician and I'm available. That's what I like to say.
That's the best kind, I think.
Yeah, people always ask me at shows, they're like, what kind of music are you going to play? I'm like, well, good. That's the only kind that matters. I'm a funk musician. I have a 9-piece funk band with horns. And we do original music, vintage, but also mixes of contemporary styles of funk. R&B. I also have a radio show, Deeper Grooves, where we play a lot of that style of music on KCSN, which is the SoCal Sound, 88.5 in LA. But yeah, I've had this iteration of the band for at least the last 10 years. We've done about 10 albums so far, and we're now finishing up another 2.5 albums and thinking about the next couple. So we just kind of go project to project, but we have a good camaraderie and like we won John Lennon Songwriting Contest and been nominated for a bunch of awards. So that's always nice. But we don't do it necessarily for the awards. We do it for the intrinsic value. It's like, we got to get the music out there. I think Elton John said, like, if I don't get this music out, I'll go crazy. That's basically how I feel.
Yeah, no, I love that. Well, and I had the opportunity to listen to some of your music before we got on here. So, I really appreciate what you're doing. And it's funny because there's some genres like that I don't think about listening to. There's other things that are sort of in the more popular zeitgeist of music. And then I go back and I listen to guys like you, and I love it. We had a guy on the show a couple years ago named Desi Valentine, and Desi, he does sort of, it sounds like this really old school croony kind of stuff, and it's like, it's not the thing that I would have just thought of to listen to, but it's incredible. And so I like your point about just music being good. It doesn't really matter what it is. Let's not call it a genre, So let's talk a little bit about your sort of, I guess, what we would call an entrepreneurial career. So you've been in this, with this iteration of your band, you said, for 10 years. Certainly you've come across some struggles along the way, whether that's, branding or business development or trying to, scare up work or whatever it is. Let's talk a little bit about that, and then also tie it into maybe, putting together your book and how all that works together.
Definitely. Well, I like how you had said that there are some parallels between musicians and CEOs. I tell people that drug dealers are really just illegal CEOs at that point. It's like they know their market, and Gary Vaynerchuk, who I love, Gary V, has tons of content and he drops a lot of F-bombs. But mainly the thing I like is that he was like, I'm not the smartest person, but nobody will out-hustle me. No one tells you as a musician that you are an entrepreneur. You are a solopreneur. Like, you're forced to be an entrepreneur. You have no other choice because you're selling a service. People are buying into you. You are the brand. So marketing, branding, social media, you just have to play that game. That's the only way to get your information out there. And, for musicians, you have all of the Spotify's and Apple Music. You got to get on playlists. You got to connect with editorial. That's just part of the zeitgeist of getting it done. And so it's like eating an elephant. You do it one bite at a time. You can't do it all at once. But also at the same time, having great podcasts like yours is great because, or having books like mine or other books like that of self-help, it's helpful that as a human being, independent of what you do, it starts with mindset. So you have to have like a growth mindset that you have limitless potential and you can learn and adapt, because there's no way if you stay the same that, with rapid technology and things changing, that you'll be able to keep pace. But more importantly, by having all this information out there and tapping into that, it allows you to be able to expand. And more importantly, as a human, you don't have the lifespan to do all the mistakes. So you look at someone like a Thomas Edison, they're like, okay, it took 10,000 experiments to make the light bulb. Or actually in the book, I tell you that there were 23 other inventors who also had 10,000 experiments. So eventually you have 230,000 experiments to eventually get to the light bulb. And that's important. See, if he just had his own 10,000, he may not have been able to figure it out. He needed the other data and research from other people to learn. At the same time, how many people would have quit at experiment 5 or 10 or 15 or 20? See, that's where the hustle comes in, is that grit. When you talk about, true perseverance, it's doing it past the point where it's fun and exciting and the honeymoon is over and you don't want to do it. It's the people that show up day in and day out and have that consistency. That's how you learn music. When you're sitting at a piano as a kid and everyone's playing outside, it sucks. And you have to do your scales and you have to do do, re, mi, and learn the ABCs of music and all that. And eventually you get to chords and you get to songs and you get to other stuff. And so it just evolves. But you have to really be dedicated and disciplined. And I think that's what you'll see, is that the level of discipline as a CEO, like CEOs, notoriously leaders are readers. They read a lot of books and they're voracious about what they know and getting the right people around them. And I think building a team in terms of a band or projects for music are very much related.
Yeah. You said something in there that I think is particularly interesting. And I think it's a take that I don't hear often, which is you don't have the lifespan to do all the problems on your own or create, experience all the mistakes on your own. Mm-hmm. I think this, I guess, sort of finite time. And I mean, I don't know, maybe it's a little dark to talk about it like this, but I think a lot of us sort of go into business or start our ventures or whatever, or maybe we don't start because we're afraid or whatever, because whatever reason, might be the thing that keeps us from getting started. But I think if you put it in the perspective of lifespan and that you've only got so much time to figure this out. So like, if you want to do it, like get off your ass and go do it. I think really, is a strong message, because I don't think, or at least I don't think in our 300 some interviews, I've had anybody bring up this idea of, time being finite and that if you don't go and make the best out of your time here, that, you might miss out. And so if you need a more compelling reason to not be afraid to start, I think that's a pretty darn good one.
Yeah, I mean, definitely that lifespan. We know that death is inevitable, but I tell people all the time, you can't worry about a physical death. That's the least of your worries. That will already happen. That's like a sunk deal in life. We know that we will all expire at some point, but it's really about how you live. The people who live passionless, purposeless, filled lives essentially have died a long time ago. People are walking around zombies because they have no direction. They have no goals. They have no any really reason for living. The Japanese, I talk about in the book, they have a word called ikigai, and they have the most octogenarians in their culture, people who have lived over 100, and they have this word ikigai, which means reason for living. What am I good at? What am I here for? I should be doing that my entire life, and people that do that live longer. So I think when you are thinking about lifespan, that is important. In the same way, we used to have mentorship and apprenticeship. Those things were super important for people to be able to learn. Like if you wanted to be a blacksmith, you go work for a person, then they died, you took over, whatever. But it's like, we need more of that. How many times do people go to school, get a degree, end up not doing anything in that field, not liking that field? It's like, we need to have self-reflection questions to be able to ask ourselves, is this moving the needle for? Is this what I'm good at? Is this what I'm here for? Is this what society needs from me? But I don't think life sets you up for that. Our education system for sure doesn't set you up for it, because they're just trying to create a bunch of Dilberts, a bunch of carbon copy. We all color in the lines and we don't think too much outside the box. But now they realize, we need more divergent thinkers. We need more creative people in the world. And that's been beaten out of people over time. But unfortunately, there's no life 101. So people have to self-educate and continually learn and ask questions. I remember I was a research assistant for a time when I was getting my MBA at Pepperdine, and I thought that I learned how to ask the right questions. But my research professor actually said, no, you just have to ask questions and then decide if they were right. But you have to start asking yourself these questions. These self-reflection questions are super important, because if you never say, what is my purpose? How am I wired? What's my shape and fit? Then is that those questions propel you to then get answers that you can decide are right or not.
You said something else in there that kind of stood out to me as well, is like, if you're if you're not living with a purpose, and you're kind of just going on through life, you're already dead. What's the point of, like, if you, it's funny to me, if you couldn't tell, I'm in a campsite, right? It's the only place I got Wi-Fi in the area, so I'm around here, and it always makes me laugh to see these kids huddled around this one area because it's got the electrical outlet for their phone to charge, and they're sitting there charging their phone, scrolling Instagram, not doing anything. They're in this beautiful area. They could be out going on a hike, playing in the lake, doing whatever, and they're huddled around this one little area that's got the electricity for their phone so that they can scroll Instagram. And that, to me, kind of sums that zombie feel up, is like they're addicted to this, and they're not living life. They're not working towards something. They're not, going that out of their way to accomplish something. And that kind of, when you said that, that's the thought that popped into my head, is those kids just huddled around that electrical outlet trying to get their Instagram fix. So
Yeah, no,
what instrument do you
I play keyboard, and I'm a vocalist.
Okay.
And then I'm a songwriter and producer. But yeah, no, I think kids should run around and get dirty and play. And people are on the screens too much. We know that it affects their sleep and their health. Social media has also caused a myriad of psychological issues. I think what happens, you look at movies like The Social Network, is that all of these things are distractions to basically end up controlling people to a certain extent. And school is the same way. It's not about education, it's about control. It's about, where do we put these kids so that they can just be exactly in this box that we want. But yeah, I think, for me as a kid, I'm like, why watch social media when I can create content? For me, I always was a creative person. It's like, I'd make plays or skits and stuff with friends, and we'd act them out and stuff like that. And and not to necessarily go anywhere, but it was like my mind was thinking about, like, how can I entertain people? How can I edutain people now, to give them nuggets of truth wrapped in something that's interesting, so that they can, not everyone's going to read a book. Basically, a guy in the book told me that your life may be the only Bible people read. People are watching you, and they're interested in what you do. And then once you have that as an artist or as a CEO, it's like, let's say you rise the ranks and you do everything correctly, and now you have this platform where it's like, you have to have something to say. There's no point to build an audience and have nothing to say. Like, at that point, it's just like, we're in the exercise of building something. That's why so many people have not asked these self-reflection questions, and they end up climbing the ladder, but then when they get to the top, they realize it's on the wrong building. It's leaning against the wrong tree. And that happens a lot. A lot of people also realize at the end of life, thinking of lifespan, that they've lived the life that someone else wanted. This was someone else's dream. When I was a kid, before I went to music school, I was signed up to be pre-med. And I realized that was my aunt's dream. She wanted to be a doctor. I didn't. I don't like blood. I don't like guts. I don't want to deliver babies or whatever. I don't want any of that. I'd rather be playing music. And so, I just think you just have to, the more you become you, the more you reveal yourself to yourself and to the world. I think that's what people gravitate to. That's what I gravitate to when I see people. They're real, and they're authentic, and they're consistently the same. People that I think try to fragment their life. I'm this person with this group, I'm this person with that group. I think that's hard to keep up. You're just taking one mask off. So yeah. I think authenticity is going to be key and unplugging for sure from social media.
Yeah. Can we talk a little bit more about the idea that you just brought up, this concept of living someone else's dreams? This is something I've been guilty of in my business. I am not a musician, but I am artistic, and I run a marketing agency or design shop, and my background's in creative, visual design. And I think that this is something that plagues a lot of creative people. And as a musician, I want to see, maybe you won't have been guilty of this in the same way that I was, but I know that I've run into situations over the course of my life where I find that, and maybe it's even outside pressure, right? Like working, in my experience, I was working in an ad agency, and because all the demands are coming from clients or account management or whatever, right? You go from being really creative, where you threw out your first salvo of what you think the design should be, and then it gets reworked by a bunch of people who aren't designers, and then you end up with this little ball of dreck that is, fits what they were looking for, right? And so, and it's tough to have a ton of pride when you create work that's basically being driven by other people, right? But like in the highly collaborative, I mean, this I think could be applied to business, but it also really applies, I think, in music, which is one of these things where, there's a lot of people who write music to sort of chase the charts or chase what's popular and do some of that kind of thing. And so I wonder if you wouldn't talk a little bit about your experience in this, maybe beyond just sort of pre-med, but, but also maybe in your creative career. Have you ever felt the pressures of trying to keep up with the Joneses or produce content that maybe isn't really that true to you, but you think it might perform well in the market? Because I think for entrepreneurs, this is something they hit too, where they will often, just to chase a buck, start a business, that they think is going to be on trend or something, but it's not something they're passionate about. So they end up just kind of burning out. So I wonder if you'd talk about your experience, if you have any in that sort of realm.
Yeah, well, many experiences. I think the first thing is that writing a book like Side Hustle and Flow and talking about my life, I do give the caveat that reading that book and then trying to do what I did again is a waste of time. There's no way you'd be able to do that because you can't create all those situations. Like it'd be the same as like if we all went back to our colleges in the same town now. Even with the same people, it wouldn't be the same experience. So you can't trap lightning in a bottle. So you have to take things with a grain of salt. You learn to figure out like the pieces of things that are universal and how that can influence your story. But it's not just like, here's a roadmap and do this exact. It's not a recipe. It's more like one way. So there's many avenues. It's like when I started in the book, I had done American Idol and I got kicked off. I thought that was the one way to get to music and to a career. And I was a vehicle, but not the only vehicle. That's why we have Toyotas and Hondas. In the same way, talking about vehicles, you have people like Ford, who ran automobile industry. He said, if I asked people what they wanted, they would have just said faster horses. So to your point with clients, they have no idea what they want sometimes until you show it to them. You have to pull an idea out of your head, put it in front of your face so other people can understand it. The customer is always right is the moniker that we hear a lot, but it's actually quite untrue. The customer is often very wrong and very misinformed and miseducated, etc. But I digress. The main thing is that there's many times where you have this duality inside you. It's like, should I do the commercial thing or should I do what's more me? And I think within myself, really, I'm only trying to become better every time for myself. I'm not doing anything in regards to if it'll be more commercial, less commercial, because that doesn't work for me. Like anytime I try to do that, it sounds too contrived and very formulaic and not authentic and cheesy and it doesn't make me feel good and that is true. It's that if you do things that you don't have passion behind, then you will burn out quickly because again, that's the grit is that you have to have that compelling why. Like you have to want to do it whether you make money or not, and if it's difficult or not. That's the only way that you'll persevere through it. I mean, look at something like Amazon. Amazon didn't turn a profit in the first 7 years. Bezos is just like, we're just going to be different, and I don't care about paying dividends. And you just have to have a very thick skin and a hard stomach for that, and not everybody has that. That's why not everybody will be an entrepreneur. Like people who are like, oh, I have a great idea. Let me do this eBay thing, or let me sell on Amazon. It's like, I mean, just because everyone's doing that, you can make money doesn't mean that's what you should do. Again, it's asking those questions. What should I do? What am I built for? Because I'm not, we're all snowflakes. We're all unique. And you can't, I couldn't fit into somebody else's clothes and they fit me the same way because that fits their shape. It doesn't fit me. So people have to dress for their body type and they have to outfit their life for their shape. Um, but yeah, I mean, you look at an artist like Prince. Prince had some amazing albums that were commercial. He had some albums that like people slept on, and they probably only sounded good to him. And all artists are like that. John Coltrane had albums like that. Miles Davis had albums like that. I think you just have to answer to the beat of your own drum. And everybody thinks that the dancer is crazy who can't hear the music. So just because you can't see my vision doesn't mean that I shouldn't go through with that. And even if I do make something that ends up being a flop, I'll learn from it. I'll learn and become better. And that's why every project that I do, all the 10 albums plus the new ones, I try to do something different every time. None of those albums are exactly the same. It's the same with like Michael Jackson. You're not going to make Thriller and then try to make Thriller 2. Like it's over. That period has passed. And you now, a different person, you got to move on to the next thing. Whether it sells as much or not, that doesn't matter. It's all about staying true to yourself. But yes, the question of, did I live this life for myself or someone else? That happens a lot. I mean, people dying will say, man, I really wished I'd lived differently. I lived the life mom wanted for me or dad wanted for me. I told my mom, she ended up getting divorced from my stepdad after 20 plus years. And she was like, well, when I got married, my mom wanted to get married. I said, well, your mom can marry him then. If that's what you want, get out. You don't have to live with that. No one's holding a gun to your head. So I think Brian Tracy sums it up well. He has this zero sum philosophy. He's like, at any point in your life, you just say, hey, if what I know now, would I do this again? If the answer is no, stop. Everybody says winners never quit. That's not true. A true winner will learn to quit, because if you're doing something and it's futile, it's not working out, it's just a waste of resources, a waste of energy, a waste of time. It's not going to be a great return on investment to that. So I think you'll know what to do, but the main thing is that you have to be quiet. When you ask yourself those questions, it's a still small voice inside you that's trying to tell you what you should do. But all these distractions that you have, like social media and television and other stuff, they will limit you being able to hear that. They will drown out that voice because it's not going to yell at you sometimes.
Yeah, no, I think that's right. And I mean, obviously, this is something that's really hard to do, even, identifying sort of who our authentic self is, because I think, especially for people who go with the flow early on and do try and kind of mold themselves to be accepted or to find a social group or what, for whatever reason, I think it does become more difficult when you're older to sort of unravel, what you've done and get back to the core of yourself. And so I think that the points you make are great, but yeah, I think that that's something that we, maybe all struggle with.
I think it's also age. It's like, in your 20s, your teens, you want to be liked by everybody. It's like at 40 plus for me, I just want to like myself. That's all I care about.
Right.
Yeah, no, I think that's actually a great point, right? Is being able to get comfortable with yourself. I think that's how people, that everybody has an opinion on, try to not live life with regret and that sort of stuff. And I think that that's a big part of it for people. I'm 42. And so it's the same kind of, feeling at my age, which is that, I'm not worried so much about trying to be accepted by the social group du jour, the cool kids or whatever, but it's more about, just getting good with myself. And so I think that that's where, I think age is really, maybe the key factor.
What you talking about, Ryan? You are the cool kid.
I know. I try to act like I'm not the cool kid. That way I don't, put off a vibe or something. I don't want
there you go. So, can you tell us about the music business? Because there's a lot of people that will get into music and don't realize there's a couple bands we worked with in the past. Vaden's one of them from back in the day. I worked with them. I did lighting for a lot of their live shows. We did a bunch of monthly concerts called the Budweiser True Underground series. We were sponsored by Budweiser, so we had that revenue coming in. We sold out every month. It was a really cool, just kind of music program that we did down in Phoenix. And the one thing that stood out to me about them is they actually ran it like a business. They actually promoted hard. They got the flyers out there. They got the sponsorship. They got, the right people in the right places to make it successful. And a lot of the people that I see just who are good musicians. They just don't understand the business aspects of it. Can you talk about like the first few years of your music career and how you kind of turned it into something that you can live off of?
Yeah, I mean, it is a journey, and I think you just have to make that first step, because you're definitely not going to be able to see the whole staircase. You're not going to be able to know where you're going to end up. So after American and really that was just kind of an incubator. I was just learning like, how do I write songs, how do I produce, how do we make our first couple of albums. And then after that band disbanded, about 10 years ago, 2013, I was like, okay, let me start releasing stuff under my own name and working on branding. And so through that process we figured out, okay, like here's our colors, we're doing red and black, and that was based on the White Stripes, who were peppermint candy doing red and white. So I was like, okay, let's have consistent color schemes. We're all gonna wear this, and then like this is like how the music is gonna be done. We're organic and we play instruments, and but I also want to have contemporary elements. So it's like we wanted to be able to have this boomerang of like older people, but also younger people could like understand the music. And then you have to look and see your market fit. You got to figure out like what other bands in your genre people like you are doing, and see how you can learn from them and adapt. And I think businesses all should do that. You have to know like what the competition is, and are you priced too high, too low, all those things. But then yeah, as a musician you have to create. Like I had joined the writing society, so I'm part of BMI, and then for years I just had the writing portion, and then people through the business were like, oh, you need the publishing portion. I had no concept. I mean, I studied that at Berkeley, but I was like, I didn't understand. Like you're leaving 50% on the table because you don't have this publishing arm set up. So then I set that up. So then I have a publishing company, Please and Funk You Publishing. And then from there, I ended up creating my own label to become an imprint, to push out the music and own the masters and stuff like that. So it's like you learn through the journey as you go. And then from there, it was like we were started doing radio promotion team. I was like, I really liked Daptone Records based out of Brooklyn. And so I went to their website and I was like, well, who do they use for promotion? And they had an email to their promotion person that was like a Gmail email. So I was like, he must be an external person. So I hit him up, said, hey, can you work for me? He said, yeah. So then that's like how we started building that up. Then he was like, and use this PR person and use this licensing company and all that. So those like breadcrumbs and building blocks came. And then from there, it was like radio was playing me. We talked to the radio station manager. I got my own radio show from that. Then that led to the podcast. And eventually that led to being the house band on Discovery Channel with Josh Gates Tonight for a few seasons at Discovery Channel. So none of those things were things I was thinking about when I started. I just wanted to be a great musician, a great singer, a great keyboardist, a great songwriter, a great producer, and then eventually publisher, label owner, licensing person, that kind of thing. But I think you, again, have to have that growth mindset that you will allow your dream to expand. And when you have big dreams, you're going to always need a team. I think whether you're a CEO or building a business, you have to be able to delegate. You have to be able to get that out there. Just like I said, you don't have the lifespan to make all the mistakes. You don't have the lifespan or the energy to do everything on a project. Like you got to bring somebody in, or some kind of tool, service, AI, something. Like it's just, there's only so many hours in the day, and a third of them we should be sleeping. So, by the time you're working, and then with me working full time, which I never usually talk about, but I'm vice president of another company in an unrelated industry. And I run a global team that's in the Philippines, Korea, Vietnam, etc. And I also do music full time. So to be able to have that dichotomy and side hustle and flow, you really have to line up those hours and make every piece count, because you only have so many hours in a day. But I think that's the thing, is that when you're a musician, nobody tells you in the beginning, like, oh, and you're going to be these other 20 things, because that's just the hats you have to wear. Or you're a CEO, but sometimes you're the accountant, like you have to wear those hats. But then you figure out sweet spots of like, I really have gifts in Excel here, and these are weaknesses. And eventually, as you build up, you want to be able to delegate and get that out there, because people when I was a kid there, I was like, oh, well, you're weak in an area, like you gotta work on it, you gotta work on it, you gotta work on it. And I was like, yeah, no, you need to build your strength. Having a strong weakness is a waste. Like it's just not gonna matter. Like Michael Jordan, amazing basketball player, phenomenal. Golf, not so much. It's like he could have did that the rest of his life, wouldn't matter. Like let it go. You can do it for fun, but don't try to build up the weaknesses to that level. Like when you can pass it to someone, there's someone who has that gift. Go focus on what you have strengths and gifts on, and then really build that. Because if you have really strong legs or really strong biceps, and you work on that, you're just gonna see much more gains. If you have, weak ankles or whatever, no matter how many calisthenics you do, it's just not gonna help to a certain extent.
Yeah, no, I think that's right. So let's talk a little bit about the process of getting your book together. So, and maybe this is another one of those sort of age related questions, but it's, there comes a time, I think, when you reach a certain level of proficiency and you feel like it's time to share. Right. And, I mean, Mike and I have been podcasting for a number of years. Big part of that was, sharing our expertise, but also to learn from the people who come on our shows. And then, but a lot of people who come on the show, are sharing the knowledge they've learned over the course of a career, right? I mean, we don't tend to have a lot of like really young guests, most of them are in 30s, 40s, 50s and beyond. And I think part of it is, and what Mike and I have sort of landed on is that, it requires a certain amount of layering of life to actually get to a point where you have something profound to say. Because I just, at 20 years old, you don't have enough life experience to really layer on anything that thick. Maybe there's some exceptions, but, in general.
Bob Dylan.
Yeah, Bob Dylan maybe. But
yeah,
Bob has not offered to come on the show just yet. He's welcome anytime. So Cliff, can you talk about, I guess, part of the decision-making process, and, I think this is time for me to commit some of my experiences to paper and see if I can actually make an impact on people by way of a book. And then just a little bit about sort of the process and, maybe things you learned along the way in producing a piece like that.
Sure. Well, I gotta say, writing a book versus music is much more fun for sure. But yeah, it was a journey, a few years of a process. I had started working on the book originally in 2014. It was called The Art of Awesome. And I was doing some interviews with some cool people, just that I thought were interesting in different spaces. I interviewed Jen Lim, who was doing Delivering Happiness, which was an offshoot of Zappos after their acquisition from Amazon. And then I talked with Zig Ziglar's son, Tom Ziglar, who I was a huge Zig Ziglar student in terms of all of his content, Success for Dummies and Born to Win and See You at the Top. And, I liked his country wisdom. So didn't get to meet the dad. He had passed away, but interviewed the son and just talked about his life. And then, I interviewed John Hope Bryant, a few other people. But after about 4 interviews, I felt like I had imposter syndrome. I felt like I had, like that what you were saying. I didn't feel like I had enough to say to make a book, maybe like a pamphlet, but not a book. And so I shelved it for probably 4 to 6 years. And then obviously March 2020, pandemic happened. All the shows dried up. And, everybody was like, let's do Instagram Live. I did like 5 of those. And randomly, like CNN picked it up and said, like, this is what artists are doing, like during the pandemic. And then I quickly was like, I can't do any more of these 6 people dropping in Instagram shows. So, so I was like, maybe this is a good time to make the book, because when am I going to have this time where like nothing's happening and I just can focus on this? So I took a course, a free course from Scribe Media. Scribe Media is an online platform. They do a lot of ghostwriting for stars like David Coggins and Tiffany Haddish. They help them write their books. But then also you can take a free course to learn how to write your own book if you don't want to pay $10,000 or whatever to have someone ghostwrite. So I was like, yeah, I'll write that book. So it helped me outline everything. And then 90 days, I was basically working on what they call the vomit draft, just throwing up all my ideas. And then eventually we'd edit sober, as Hemingway would say. And I think the editing process was, I think, the hardest part. That's where I wanted to quit, because it felt like being in English high school again. And my papers were bleeding red ink from these editors who were like, you don't know syntax and grammar and did you go to school? That kind of thing. And so, yeah, I learned a lot through that process. But I think getting your ideas out there, structuring it is a good idea. And then obviously, once I found a publisher, Black Spring Press Group in the UK, who wanted to put the book out globally, then we went through more edits and stuff. Then once the book was done, it's like, yes, that's the finish line. But I tell people all the time, with music or books or anything else, we focus so much on the pregnancy, having the baby, the 9 months, 10 months to get to now the baby's done. But anyone who's had a baby, I haven't, but I've seen it on TV. Look who's talking. What happens is you don't just have a baby and that's it. You got to go now raise that baby and teach it stuff, do stuff. So it's like in the same way. Now you got to go promote. You got to get on podcasts and do interviews. You got to do editorial. You got to get reviews. Like there's a process. I did a year of promotion, for the book, and now we're expanding that into like a mini doc and a video online course and a bunch of stuff. So it's like you kind of have to understand like the life cycle of your product, and if it's evergreen, like you got to keep getting it out there. Like people have to know that you exist, and you're going to invest time, you're going to invest money in that. So I think it's not for the faint of heart. I think 80% of people say they want to write a book, maybe 5% will. It's a long process, and I may or may not write a book again, but I will say that we did do all the formats. So after the hardcover and softcover and the Kindle, they're pretty much all the same, just digital mediums. And then we did the audiobook. So the audiobook on Audible has my music as all the transitions. So I think that really ties it in together, and you get to hear my voice, for better or worse. I know I have like a squeaky voice, but so it allows people to, from the horse's mouth, get the actual information. So I think that's the best version for me of the book, but I like seeing the printed versions. It feels like a real kinetic thing to have actual books than just the digital form. But I think however you get it out there, self-publishing, traditional publishing, there's no right or wrong road. I think definitely just get your dreams and your ideas out there. And the whole point is that, with Velvet Underground or whatever, those bands starting, they were like, oh, they didn't sell that many copies of their first album. But everybody who listened to that album wanted to start a band. That's what I want to do with my book. It's like, even if 10 people are changed lives, they want to go hustle harder and do something different, because being normal is being basic. Being normal is being average. And being average is like, just get out of bed. Everyone can be average. It's like, you want to be above average, then you got to 10x your life. You got to life hack and figure out other ways to do counterculture things. Essentially, the culture is going one way. You got to go the other way. But I really enjoy having the book out there. I don't know if I'll not write another book, but I encourage a lot of people to, if they have that dream, to do it. But make sure that it is your dream, because not everybody will do it. It's a long, lengthy, arduous process, but obviously rewarding one.
Yeah, a ton of work. So, well, and I think that's one of those things, not unlike creating an album, right? I mean, you do have to sort of sit down and work through the concept and everything. And it's just, I don't know that everybody's cut out for everything that is to follow. You mentioned a few things, but like press and all that kind of stuff. Like if you really want to find success writing a book, you've got to do all that stuff. But I think it's important that people like you do go through with those processes, because people need, somebody will read your message and get it in the way that make something for them. Not everybody can read, I don't know, whoever, the Zig Ziglars of the world, and take away from them the message they want. Like I know a lot of times when I do some reading, I have a hard time converting what they say into action, right? But then somebody will say the same thing in a different way, and that'll be the thing, right? And so I think that, people like you taking the impetus to write a book, and then, just putting it out there in hopes that it affects a few people, I think is positive.
Yeah.
I was just going to say that you brought up as well that like performing to a small crowd, or your book might not be New York bestseller, but that one or two people that are at that show, that it stands out and means something to them, that's what it's all about. I've seen bands in tiny underground venues and that have just changed my life. One of them is LP. I don't know if you've ever heard of her, but she's amazing. I saw her in a dive bar in Phoenix, and I think there was 15 people total, and she still put on a performance that just blew my mind. And because of that performance, I followed her career, and now she's playing to 10,000 plus people. And it's really cool to see her from that little dive bar to playing in these huge festivals. And, I think it's a matter of, just put your heart and soul into it in every performance, in every book, in every paragraph, whatever it is. And one way or another, you'll find success.
Yeah, I just kind of wanted to add on to that too, because that was my thought too, is that, perform like your book is a bestseller, perform like your album will be heard by everyone, right? Because you never know who you're going to hear. I mean, I remember one of my famous dive band stories was I saw this band at a place called the Roach Motel in Pocatello, Idaho, called Incubus. And at the time they played there, they were on their didgeridoos and doing all this stuff, and nobody had ever heard of them, right? And not more than a few years later, they're, top of the world. Same with Linkin Park. I toured with Linkin Park when they were young kids, and nobody paid that much mind to them. They were, not that big a deal. And then by the next summer, they were the biggest band on the planet, so it's like, but I mean, you wouldn't have known that they were playing to 5 people or 500 people or 500,000 people. It was the same show. So I think that that's a good way to just sort of go through life.
Agreed. Yeah, because you're playing it for yourself, and it's the learning. It's the journey or paying your dues. All artists have to go through that process, for the most part, unless someone gives you like a leg up or a platform. You have to do that grind. You have to hustle through. But it's like, sometimes you're playing just for the janitor. I watched the Little Richard documentary, actually two, in the last couple of weeks, and he helped to have the Rolling Stones and the Beatles in the UK open for him. And he was like, when they opened for me, nobody knew them but the mamas, but it's like, that's how people start. And now they're like household names. So it's like, yeah, you got to take those, those gigs. I tell people, like Tupac said, I want to be that rose that grows from concrete. I tell people all the time, like, good things grow from poop, essentially. It's like, it's the fertilizer sometimes in your life, those experiences.
Yeah, nope,
Yeah,
it's
that makes sense.
Yeah, one other thing I wanted to get into before we start to wrap, we're actually kind of getting to the end here. I wanted to talk to you about just sort of pivoting. So one of the things that comes up as sort of a theme here is that, people have to either pivot in their career or pivot in their strategy or something to make sure that they are doing the right thing, or being willing to make a change sort of midstream, I think is the idea. And so I wanted to talk to you about, if you've had any experiences in your career where, you're going one direction, but you were willing to sort of hear a different side, right? And this is maybe an extension of our conversation earlier about sort of molding yourself to somebody else's ideas. But have you, I guess, been influenced to the extent that you learned something, discovered that maybe you were taking a wrong step, and been willing to pivot?
Yeah, I mean, I think everyone in life has to pivot. I mean, you have things like the pandemic that caused a lot of shifts and pivots. So sometimes it's like, a phenomenon. And then sometimes it's just knowledge. Growing up, now I know in hindsight, the food pyramid is wrong. Like from the 80s, it just was no good. and it wasn't based on any science. So it's like science and technology, other things like the update. And so like you have to update as a person. And when the information changes. So one album that I'm working on right now is a jazz record. And I had never thought to do a jazz record, but I worked with a PR company, and they were like, look, you're doing R&B and funk, and somehow, because you had said, it's not the genre you think of top of mind, you're getting lumped in now to hip hop. And what that's doing for you is it's hard for you to find the place you should be, because you're going up against, Juice WRLD and Travis Scott, which are like huge. And so they're like, there's just no place for you in that area at the moment. They were like, now, if you do a jazz record, because they have their own mediums and their own outlets, they were like, we can put you in this big campaign to do New York Times and Jazz Is and Downbeat and this kind of thing. So we're kind of in that process now. But it was like, if I didn't hear that information, because it wasn't a label, it was whatever. It was like, this is what a publicist was saying. Like, I've run campaigns for jazz artists, and 10x results compared to the 1x results you're getting for the same price, because of where you're trying to hit. Your stuff is great, but it's just falling on deaf ears. And so then that put me on a trajectory of a year of figuring out how to arrange in a different style than I was doing at the time, but then related to my style. So it was a process, but now we've come up with an album that sounds amazing and would never have probably been done because it wasn't even on the radar, except for this person giving us this information. But we made that artistically, but also as a business decision. Why wouldn't we want to open up these other doors that may then help us on the other side? Because it's like you become popular in one area, it's a little bit easier to move over. You look at Taylor Swift, she came up in country, then she moved to pop. You saw Bruno Mars in pop, then he moved to funk. Like you have more choices once people know who you are. And so, but somebody may hear that information and it just falls on their deaf ears. So PR could tell me that. I'm like, well, I'm gonna just stay in my lane and stick to what I know, and that's that's it. Yeah. But I was like, no, let's forge this new path. It's not something I was thinking about, but it sounds interesting, and I believe what you're saying, based on campaigns, is true. So we'll see what happens. Doesn't mean that you're gonna do it and it's gonna work out. It just means that,
Sure.
Why not?
Try. Yeah, I mean, sort of recently, famously Lil Nas X did this with the Old Town Road song, and it went on to be, and for people who don't know, basically he's a rapper, but he put that into a country music category on iTunes or something like that, and it just exploded and became maybe the biggest song on the planet for a period of time. And so, I think that that's a really good example of sort of a pivot where, you guys were still in control of the situation and artistically you were able to do something. So you weren't necessarily molding to meet a trend, but nonetheless, you were making a business decision that was really, that this slight degree of shift is going to put us in such a better situation or in such a better light because we're going to have more exposure to more people that we're actually going to buy future freedom by doing it this way. And so I think that's a really good example.
Excellent. Yeah, I agree. I think, and those pivots will happen, and sometimes outside forces will create them, or sometimes inside forces, like you choose to pivot, like you have changed. Like years ago, when I was a kid, I read this book called Tara and the Wanderer, and it's kind of like a Harry Potter-ish vibe. It's got mythology and stuff. But anyway, basically, it's this boy. He becomes a man essentially through the process, and he's looking for this mirror, and at the end of the book he gets to the reflecting pool, which is supposed to be this magical mirror, and he just sees himself, but he's like, I'm older, I've changed. It's like that's sometimes an internal pivot. It's like you go through a process, you experience a loss or a death or illness, it's like you become somebody different on the other side, and then you have to pivot, like to because you're different. So it's like the 25 you and 35 you and 45 you are at the core the same, but other things will change you. So I think don't be afraid of pivoting. I think they can be good and bad, but again, you kind of have to start making some pivots and then adjust based on information to see if they're good or not.
Yeah, no, I think that's right. Yeah. Well, and I think that that's a really good point too. Just man, we've talked a lot of existential stuff in this episode, but also just sort of this idea that change is inevitable, and so, but it's what do you do with it, right? Like if you're the same person at 40 as you were at 15, you're probably sad and lonely and sitting in a corner somewhere because nobody likes a 15-year-old, 40-year-old. And so, I mean, I think the change part's really important, but to the point about pivoting, I think yes, being willing to sort of grow and adapt and change as a human is really part of the process. Like there's no expectation that you will always stay the same. So, and I think it can be the same in business, right? There's no expectation that you do exactly the same thing day in, day out, always, instead, rather you need to ebb and flow and grow and evolve and do all the things to, be ultimately better version of yourself at one point in the future.
Definitely. I mean, business world for sure shows that. You look at a company like Intel, we're inside all the chips. That's not what they used to do. They were something else. They made big chips. They did other things. Then eventually they were, no, these little chips. That's where we're going to pivot, and that's what we're going to do. Kodak worked in the world of film. In the process of learning how to restore film, they came across an ingredient, astaxanthin, and this process that they then learned. Sorry, not Kodak. Fujifilms. Fujifilms was able to restore film and figure this out, that they could help with the anti-aging of film through their process. Eventually, film died. And so Fuji decided to pivot into beauty. And they took all their anti-aging properties, put it into skincare, and they became a huge huge business now, on a whole different industry. So I think those pivots in business for sure are important.
Yeah. Well, I think that's a good one to go out on. You want to tell people how they can reach out, how they can get in touch with you, get a copy of your book, maybe listen to your music?
I love all those things. So to get in touch with me, people can email me, cliff@sidehustleandflow.net. They can stream the radio show Deeper Grooves on the SoCalSound.com. SoCalSound.org. The book Side Hustle and Flow is out on Amazon, Audible, Kindle, Barnes and Noble. So where books are sold, you can find it online. Website sidehustleandflow.net, and then social media at Cliff Beach Music for Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, YouTube. And if you want to stream music online, just under Cliff Beach. Cliff like the cliff, beach like the beach. If you're pronouncing it Cliff Beach, you're pronouncing it wrong. Don't do it.
So, and I will just add to this episode's actually going to drop tomorrow, which is August 24th. And I believe you have a show coming right up too. So if you want to plug that, you're welcome to.
Yeah. So, well, you guys are lightning assembly fast. Yeah, I'm doing a string concert with Constellation Quartet on Saturday, August 26th in Hermosa Beach, 7 p.m. So people who are local to SoCal, come on through. But if not, you can stream 2 of our recordings together. They are great. One is called Wildflower Strings Edition on my Son of a Beach record. And I'm also on Constellation Quartet's debut album on a cover of Lady Gaga, Applause, both with strings. So
cool.
We'll be here.
Well, yeah, no, thanks for that. And thanks for, everybody who streams this, in the first couple days of release, you'll be able to catch Cliff live. So, take a listen. So cool. Well, Cliff, we really appreciate you taking the time to do this, man. It's been great.
Thanks, Rob. Thank you, Mike.
Absolutely. And thanks so much to everybody who listens to the show this week and every week. And we'll see you guys next time.